Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Triangle Area SQL Server User Group's main meeting for the month of January in 2023. So this is our first main meeting of the year. Definitely not our last one, hopefully. So with us tonight, we have Lee Markum, who's going to talk to us about 4 focus points in a new DBA role. So please, Lee, take it away.
Hi, everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And let me get my screen shared. Okay, so as was mentioned, we're going to be looking at 4 focus points in a new DBA role with this particular presentation. Again, thank you to the TriPass user group for inviting me to speak. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to everyone. A little bit about me, because a lot of you won't know me. I started in IT back in February 2008. I thought I was just like getting into a little bit of a application management kind of role. I was moving from a call center supervisor into managing an application. Little did I know that I was about to jump headlong into IT and found that I really liked it. So I pursued database administration and got the title officially in 2014 after doing the job for a while without the title, and I'm sure we're all kind of familiar with that. You can catch my blog at leemarkum.com, and currently I'm at Upland Software as a cloud database administrator. Views here, of course, are my own, and you can contact me via email at liam@leemarkum.com. This is going to be a level 100, 200 type presentation. So this is, you're not going to see a bunch of complex T-SQL. You're not going to see super polished solutions that are like ready to deploy out to a huge enterprise. That's not my goal here. My goal here is to get you started on some key areas that you're going to need to focus on when you start a new role. So the agenda is we're going to talk about building an environment inventory, and then we're going to take a look at backups, and then SQL agent job notifications, which seems like a little of an odd thing to have in the list, but I promise you it's going to make sense. And then we're going to take a look at security. So building an environment inventory. So when I am in a job interview, I always ask the question on the slide, how many SQL servers are there at this company? And I don't always get the best answer. In fact, I've gotten some really wrong answers after I took the job and discovered that whoever I was talking to really didn't know how many SQL servers there were. But it's an important question because you can't manage what you don't know about. If someone tells you we have, 12 SQL servers and you get in the environment and there are 50, that's different. That's a different scenario. Well, why do you want to build an inventory? Why do we need one? What advantages are there from building said inventory? Well, for one, it tells you about your scope of work. As I just alluded to, if you ask this question at an interview and someone says 12 and you take the job and there are 50, that's a different scope of work. So it tells you about that size of your inventory, or the environment tells you your scope of work. It's also going to give you some information about what's out of support in your SQL Server environment. And this is a great thing to know because for me, this always becomes like my first project list. I take a look at, out of these 50 SQL servers that I've discovered now that I've been on the job for a while, how many of them aren't supported by SQL Server Microsoft support anymore? And those all go on to a project list for me to work on. And the other reason that I would encourage you to build an inventory is I really feel like it shows other people that you're serious about your learning environment. So the effort that it's going to take, not that it's monumental, but the fact that people are going to see you building this inventory putting the time and effort in to really understand your environment is, I feel like, going to show them something about you as an employee, you as a person, and they're going to take you seriously. The next thing or reason that you would want to build an inventory is you're usually going to find SQL servers that nobody knew was even around. Your teammates are going to learn about stuff that was installed, and they're all going to think, where'd that come from? I don't know. So I think it's an important thing to do from that perspective as well, because your teammates, your new teammates at the new job or in the new role you're in a new department, even though maybe they've been working there a while, aren't always going to be aware of what's in the environment. And then it helps you and the company make licensing decisions. So I have been in situations where I was given a low number to that question, how many SQL servers are there at company X? And I do an inventory and I find out that there's 4 or 5 times that low number in the environment. And in this particular scenario, the company is licensing VMware, and each SQL server is licensed individually. Well, at a certain point, you reach a tipping point where it makes sense to license VMware hosts and just stack all your SQL servers on there to the degree that they're, of course, able to handle all that workload. And that's actually cheaper or better. And so having an inventory helps you know when you might be reaching that sort of sticking point or tipping point for your environment. So you're convinced that you need an inventory. Now what? We're going to look at 4 methods that you can use to start building that inventory. So method number 1 is simply using a central management server, and you can manually add servers to it as you discover them through talking with your new coworkers. Now, I know that manual is a curse word in IT, but hear me out. When you start a new role, especially if it's at like a brand new company, you're going to be really busy the first week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And that's if the company is good at onboarding. If they're not very good at onboarding, you're going to be busier for longer than that, doing things like getting access to servers, meeting with people, going through the ever exciting HR stuff. And through that process, you're going to hear about SQL servers. And you're not going to have the time, maybe, or even the relationships necessary yet to ask someone, hey, can we use this tool or that tool or some other tool to automate the process of building an inventory for yourself. You're just going to have some notes probably. Just to get yourself started, I'd really encourage you, just build a central management server and manually register the most important SQL servers, because those are the ones you're going to hear about first. If you do want to automate the creation of a central management server, there is an article there on the slide from MS SQL Tips about how you can make that happen. So method number 2 for building an inventory is using the Microsoft Assessment and Planning Toolkit. And I have a link on the slide that will take you out to a blog, explains how the MAP Toolkit works and how to use it. The MAP Toolkit is, by default, it's going to install like a local SQL Server Express. And you may not want that. You can install it on something newer. You just have to be sure that you indicate in the installation process that you have a named SQL instance called maps that you want to install. And you don't have to install this everywhere where you're going to create an inventory or where you're going to do a scan. This is simply a utility. You install it even on your own laptop or a utility server in the environment, and you can use it then to just scan the environment to find out what is in the environment there in terms of SQL servers. So on the slide is a screenshot of an Excel sample that will show you kind of what the output looks like. So So you're going to get things obviously like the computer name, SQL Server instance name. You'll get, the edition and version, service pack that has been installed, whether it's clustered, that sort of thing. You're also going to get information about CPU and RAM and a few other things that wouldn't fit onto the screenshot for the slide. But this is a sample of the output that you're going to get from running the map toolkit. The next thing that you can do to create an inventory for yourself is going to be using T-SQL. And again, I have a blog post that will link out to a description of what that would look like. And we're going to do some demos here in a few minutes so you can see some of this in action. Fourth method for building an inventory is to use PowerShell. Again, I have a link out to a blog article that talks about how to use DBA tools, which is a PowerShell module, to find and create an inventory for your SQL servers. So we have a demo time. So the first thing we're going to do is use some T-SQL to create an inventory for yourself. So what I'm going to do is just take this and connect to my central management server that I have. And if it doesn't exist, I'm going to create this DBA utility database. I tend to put utility scripts and those kinds of things in a separate database rather than in master. You don't have to put it in a separate database, but this is just what I do. So I'm going to make this, and then we'll step into the DBA utility database. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a view that's called Get SQL Server Properties. I am using a newer syntax called creator alter. If you are on a SQL Server or you have SQL servers that are pre-2016, then you're going to need to use this older syntax where you're going to check if something exists, and then you'll drop and or create the object that you're wanting to do. And what this does is it uses the server property call, and I'm passing different things into it to get things like the instance name, and I have a case statement to tell me, to parse out what the product versions are in case we don't have the numbers memorized. We can just read this, and it's pretty straightforward. So here on 4 servers, I now have that view definition. I'm going to create a table. So what I'm showing you here is actually two different methods on doing this. We're going to create a view, and then we're going to create a table. We're going to insert into the table the information from the view so that you can persist the information over time. And I'll talk a little bit about why you might want to do that. Again, here's a newer syntax, drop table if exists. And what I'm also doing here is using the inline syntax for creating an index directly in the create table statement as well. This index is here so that it's on server name and SQL Server instance so that you don't end up with duplicate entries. So I'm going to create a stored procedure that is just a select from the view. So how does this all work? Well, I'm connected to the central management server, and if I just select everything from the view, which I realize I'm using select star, I can put the list in here, but for brevity, I just did star. Here's what you get back. The server name, you get the date when you actually collected this information, the computer, the SQL Server instance, and here you have the product version, the CU level, and what edition and version number. So if you want to, you can persist this information into a table, which is what this stored procedure is going to do for us. And then I can just select it out from the tables. It's literally the same information, but I want to give people options so you can pick what you like and what you don't like. And the other reason I like this is because of this date ran. So if you execute this stored procedure, perhaps maybe after each patching round, you can see the progression of how your SQL servers have been patched. And it gives you just another record of, hey, in January, I was on this patch. In March, it changed. I can see. So between January and March in this date, we had a patch that went through on this particular SQL server. So that's how to use T-SQL to create an inventory. So we're going to look at PowerShell. And what I have here is, let me straighten this out a little bit so I can, okay. So what I have here is a module called Import Excel. It does a lot more than that, but you can only name modules in certain ways. And I've installed that module here. And what we're going to do is run find-DBA instance. So what that's going to do is actually do a scan of the environment through several different methods. So a little bit of a warning here. You need to talk to your security folks before you run something like this, because it will trigger alerts, and they will show up at your desk or hit you in Teams or call your desk phone or however your company communicates and ask you what you are doing. So just be aware of that. I do have it pointed just at my local computer at this point. I'm getting everything from this, and then I'm going to show you just in a little grid what kind of information you get back. You can see it's doing a find SPN. It's looking at WMI. And then you have the information that it spits out for you. It's very similar to the server property query that I showed you before. Again, this is just another method for you to create that inventory. So what you can do is set some variables up, create a file. You can tell it, hey, I want to insert into this SQL Server instance this database, schema, and table. This is the same thing I just ran. You're just going to put it all into a spreadsheet. And then you're going to use import-excel, grab that file, pass it to another PowerShell command, write-dba db table data, which will then create a table if it doesn't exist. Down here at the far right, we're saying -auto create table so that the PowerShell will create that table for you. Again, there are other ways to do this. You could create the table yourself ahead of time. This is just a quick, dirty way to make it happen. So as an exercise for the listener or watcher, you could look into how to make this a little more clean. This last line here, 14, is just going to read the data out. So when I run this, it's going to go through the process that we went through before. It creates an Excel file, it imports that data, and reads it back out. So this information that you see in the PowerShell window is the same information that was just inserted into a table. Now, here we have the same code. This part here is all the same. What's different is I'm giving you get-ad computer. So you can run this code against Active Directory and filter. In this case, I'm looking for any computer name that contains SQL in it, or SQL. Now, this is highly dependent upon Active Directory being clean and up to date and your own naming conventions. So you might need to adjust the filtering to make sense for your particular environment. All of this does exactly the same thing as the previous PowerShell that I demoed. I don't have an Active Directory to point this at, so I can't run this to show you what it does. But the code is the same, other than this part where we're getting information from Active Directory. Okay. Give me just a moment to move us forward. I was not clicked where I needed to be. So I want to talk just a little bit more about this fourth method, PowerShell. It does allow you to combine the various methods that we talked about. So the map Excel output, you can use PowerShell to import that module, import the Excel that you create for map into a table. You can use PowerShell to call T-SQL scripts that you have using invoke-DBA queries. So the PowerShell gives you some flexibility on how to create that inventory, even beyond just the 4 methods I showed you as standalone methods. You can combine the various things that you're going to be doing. And I did it again. So the next focus point is going to be the all-important backups. With respect to backups, there are a few important things. You need to know that you're actually taking backups. I know that sounds elementary, and in many ways it is, but I have seen databases or SQL servers that didn't have backups set up, so there were no backups. You also need to know what is backing up your SQL servers. Also, that seems really basic, foundational, elementary, and it is, but I have been in scenarios where companies were using 3 different products to back up the same SQL servers. And the effect is not cumulative. You will disrupt the backup chain if you use multiple products. So that's no good. You need to know if you're using snapshot technology of some kind, or something like SQL Safe, or if you are using Ola Hollengren, or in the case of this company, are you unwisely using all 3? You need to have this information. And you really need to know the general backup schedule that is used for the company that you're at. And the reason for that is you are going to get asked multiple times by a variety of people across the environment about whether the server is being backed up, or they'll ask you to take a fresh backup because they're about to do something to a system. And if you know the schedule, then you know you already have backups, or maybe you don't need a full backup. You just might want to take a transaction log backup before this person does whatever it is that they're going to do. And so that will also save you some work. But you don't know that if you don't know what your backup schedule is like. So there are, of course, a variety of ways to make backups. How are we going to accomplish this? You could use the graphical user interface in the SQL Server Management Studio. However, this is not an automated way. So you might use this if you need a one-off copy only, but you're not going to use this very frequently. Maintenance plans are certainly a traditional way that especially system administrators have used to create automated ways to back up SQL Server. Of course, you can just use standard T-SQL. It has lots of options and flexibility that the maintenance plans are not going to offer you. There is PowerShell using DBA tools. There's a command called backup-DBA database that allows you to do exactly what it sounds like. Has lots of options. There's also the Ola Hollengren maintenance routine, and it's wonderful, tested worldwide, and very thorough. There is another option that I became aware of. There's lots of third parties. There's Minionware, SQL Safe, and a number of other things that you could use to take backups. The critical thing here is You just need to be able to you just need to be certain that you can restore to point in time with whatever backup technologies you're going to use. So let's do a demo talking about looking at your backups for your environment. So this first query I just took as this shows, I just took a look at SP Blitz and pulled out and commented some other things from it to make it a little more readable, more comprehensible, a little more understandable. This part's going to show anything that hasn't had a full backup in the last 7 days. I'm going to join all those records to anything that is in a full recovery model, but no transaction log in the last day. So we'll take a look at all of this. As you can see, I'm a horrible DBA of my own environment. Of course, that's there for being able to demonstrate that the code actually does what I'm telling you it does. But this is the point. You want to use code like this to verify that your databases are actually being backed up. You want to be able to do this kind of check at will so that you can check on your environment and know what's happening. Another thing that you could do is you could just run SP Blitz from the first responder kit. Now, SP Blitz is wonderful, and I love the first responder kit. It gives you a ton of information, and that's a good thing. It can also be a bad thing in this sense. If you're like me, there are a number of people who at any given moment in time can hit you up and ask you for help. They might hit you up on Teams or Slack or call your desk phone or however it is that people communicate with you as a DBA or as the person responsible for SQL Server in your environment. And if you run SP Blitz and you're focused on this section here where it's talking about backups that haven't been performed recently, and you get interrupted and you go off to do the other thing, and while you're doing the other thing, 3 other people also ask you for help. 3 hours later, you come back and you're looking at this and you might not remember what you were doing. You might get distracted and look through this. You're looking down the list and suddenly you forgot that you were trying to focus on backups. And so it can be a situation where it's kind of hard to keep you focused on the thing that you're actually interested in. So I did discover that it does have parameters that will allow you to filter or narrow down the amount of results that it returns. And in this case, if you tell it at ignore priorities above 9, you will get just this priority 1 here, which is backups and reliability, which will tell you about backups and what your last check DB was like in terms of how long ago did it occur. And this is a much more narrow focus set of rows to return. You're less likely to get distracted. When you come back to this, it's really easy to pick up where you left off. But you're not done if you only have a backup strategy. Having those backups is great, but you need to be able to restore them. And you need to test that you can restore them. You need to think about, am I going to use SSMS to restore? Am I going to use PowerShell? Am I going to use the third party's interface? Do I know how to do any of those things? So backups are important as a person in a new DBA role. You're responsible for SQL Server, but you have to know that you can actually restore those backups as well. And not only are you testing yourself, but you're testing the backups as well so that you know they actually work. Just because you have backups and you can restore, also again, doesn't mean that you're in the clear. Those backups might be corrupt. You might have issues that would prevent you from using them. And so you only find that out, though, if you actually test restoring. So the next area that I would encourage you to focus on when you step into a new role responsible for SQL Server environments is looking at SQL agent job notifications. Now, I've felt this way for a long time. If people are going to take the time to create a job, they want it to do a certain thing or a certain number of things in a certain order, and they want it to complete successfully. They also want to know, or they should want to know, if it doesn't do whatever it's been designed to do, if it fails for some reason. So if a job's worth creating, it's worth knowing about when it fails. Invariably, though, we don't always know that information. So there are certain challenges with agent job notifications, such as no notifications. You might have jobs that are set up and they're not configured to notify anyone. So if they fail, no one's going to find out. You also have a challenge of notifications going to the wrong people, which is just as bad as having no notifications. Because when I get an email and it looks like it has nothing to do with me, I usually don't open it, or I might not open it for a while. And if it's important and it didn't look like it was for me, then you've really notified no one. And we all get overwhelmed with email. People will start building rules and then go to folders that they never look at. So a couple of challenges here: no notifications and notifications going to the wrong people. So how do you find those failed SQL agent jobs? And I have a link out to a blog post. Again, I have some demos coming up, but there's a link to this blog that will answer this question of how do I find SQL agent jobs that are failing that maybe no one knows about. And then how do I find SQL agent jobs that don't have an email operator assigned? Third-party monitoring can help. So things like SolarWinds DBA or SolarWinds SAM or SQL Sentry or whatever your favorite third-party monitoring tool is, for the most part, they're going to have some way to notify someone that an agent job has failed. And the reason that this is in the list before we go to the demos is in every job I've gone to as a DBA, I've found jobs that were failing that no one knew about. And I go fix those. I notify the people who are responsible for that data. And in the process, as a person who's new in that DBA role, that makes me communicate with people in my company. I have to communicate with my new team. They refer me to people that they think it might be. And eventually I reach the accounting person who tells me, oh, they haven't had this data for 3 months. Thank you so much for fixing it. Well, guess what? You've accomplished two things. You've built relationships with all the people that you talk to on the way to figuring out that this person in accounting is actually the person responsible. And you've become the hero for that person because you fixed something that apparently no one else was paying attention to. So now they like you. They're on your side. So we're going to go do a little bit of a demo here. So this code is just going to find failed agent jobs, and you get a list here. It'll tell you, when it ran, the name of the job, etc. Pretty basic. This is going to give you information where the email value is not set. There's no email operator. The notify level is 0, and the schedule is enabled. So you run this, you're going to get, in my particular environment, we have, again, the name of the job. We have which SQL server that's on. And again, you can see that there is no email operator set up. So again, this is another project list for you, things to fix. So how are we going to do that? So you can use, first of all, the script to create an operator to use. And I've already done this in my particular domain or my particular computer system here. And then I have this code that is going to just use a select to create a statement that will update the job. So it's going to, again, look at sysjobs, sysjob schedules, sysschedules. We're going to find the job is enabled, but it doesn't have an email operator. So here are those jobs, and you can shift multi-select, copy this out, and put this into SSMS so you can take a look at it to see that it did in fact build the statement that you expected it to build. And this is why I actually do this. Once you've tested this a few times and you know that it builds the correct statement, you could come back here and use a cursor or some other method to actually execute this. Again, this is just a starting point for you to build the kind of statements that you would need that would fix this problem. So the last area that I feel like you should focus on is SQL Server security. The reason that I picked this to be last, even though you think, well, security is pretty important, shouldn't you do that first? Well, I don't think so, because if you're in a new role, even if you're in a new role at the same company, you likely have a new team or at least different team members that you're now working with. And you may not have that job equity that I talked about earlier. You might not have that credibility with them early on. Particularly if you're at a brand new company, you don't have any credibility. I mean, you were hired for the job, but people are still going to test you. They need to get to know you. You need to build a relationship with them. So after you do those first three things and they all see that, you will have established credibility with those folks, and you'll be able to open up and talk about this topic of security and handle it better because you'll have the credibility needed. Particularly in publicly traded companies, you're going to be able to, you're going to need to be able to answer the question, who has access and what kind of access do they have? You need to be able to identify those folks with high-level privileges and that are in high-level roles like sysadmin and other roles within SQL Server that could potentially damage or be leveraged to damage your company's SQL servers and databases. So I want to offer to you a couple of scripts that I really come to love and use over the years, and that's the SRV permissions and DB permissions from Kenneth Fisher. You can get these scripts from the GitHub that I have here on the slide, and we will of course demo those in a few minutes. Of course, you can use the SP Blitz from the first responder kit as well. And we'll take a look at those right now. So this first query is just something I found off the internet that apparently didn't run correctly. I had too much highlighted maybe. There we go. I just I pulled it off the internet just as an example of something quick and dirty that people could run to get some information about accounts that are in the sysadmin role. And if you, maybe you weren't familiar with the map toolkit and you saw this, you would know, this might pique your interest and you could go look and see, well, what is the map toolkit? What is it doing? Why is it in the sysadmin role? That sort of thing. I have one here that's security admin 1 that is in the security admin role That might be okay. It might not, depending on your particular company's rules and policies about security. You can use the SRV permissions and pass it a role name like sysadmin to find all of the sysadmins for a particular system. You're going to get a few different outputs. This top part gives you the server role, and this, of course, is the SA account. The bottom part here, which I really love, is it gives you this drop script and an add script. So if you get rid of it, you have an easy script there to help you do that. If you need to put it back, you have this as well at your fingertips to take care of that particular issue. Now, again, if you come across this and you see, oh, map toolkit, what is that? Oh, it's a sysadmin. This could tip you off that maybe you have something you need to go investigate so that you can provide a security report to whoever you're reporting to. Here is using SPSRV permissions, and you pass it a principal. So again, you're interested in map toolkit. You have some server level information about that. You can pass that information in for a specific principle that you're interested in, and you get some information about that. You can see check policies off, check expiration is off. Again, you have the drop and the create scripts here. So I really like the Kenneth Fisher stored procedures. They give you a lot of good information. If you are looking for security related to a specific database, for example, then you run that and you can see, oh, I have this database named college football. Here's a login called college football app. It's in the data reader role. And here's how to drop or add that. You get similar information here. You can see the connect permission that it's been granted, and a wealth of other information that comes back. Again, you can revoke the connect permission. You can put it back if you need to. The other thing you can do is you can run this and say all in the database name parameter. It is going to use a cursor to loop through and give you the information for all the databases. You can run SP Blitz and find security information related to databases and server level. Again, though, if you want to try to keep yourself focused, you can look at passing the parameter of @ignore priorities below 229, and you'll get just the security information so that you can keep yourself focused in between meetings or interruptions from teams or emails that happen that look urgent, that sort of thing. So that the first responder kit itself and the combination of that with the busyness of your own company doesn't get you distracted from what it is that you're trying to do. There's a bit of a bonus thought here. You might want to think about monitoring as an additional area. You don't necessarily have to focus on this. Different companies are going to have different thoughts about monitoring, but I do feel like someone responsible for a SQL Server environment does need to think about monitoring. How are you monitoring? Do you have the information that you need in order to investigate not only just a current issue, but that thing that someone's going to come to you and say happened last Tuesday at 3 a.m. Do you have a way to look at that? These are all things that you should think about. Lots of third-party options out there. If you use a third-party option, you're less likely to run into gaps or things that are missing in the data. You can use First Responder Kit that can log various results to a table. You do things like log SP who is active to a table. You also have, in 2016 and above, you have Query Store, and that is a fantastic tool built into SQL Server that you can enable. That is basically like a airplane flight data recorder. You'll get a lot of metrics about execution plans, the various execution plans that might occur, runtime, CPU, all kinds of ways that you can slice and dice information using Query Store. There is also a link here on the slide out to a presentation where I talk about the Query Store for a little bit. For those of you who are in the cloud, you need to think about things like storage IOPS, throughput, and latency. If you're on AWS, do you have CloudWatch configured to show you this information for your EBS volumes? Do you know if you're hitting max IOPS or throughput, and how often are you hitting those maximums? Do you need to adjust your EBS? And I'm sure that Azure is going to have similar information. I just happen to work in an AWS environment, so I can't point you specifically to Azure things, but AWS, yes, there's monitoring there, and I'm sure that Azure has it as well. But again, these are just things you need to think about. How are you monitoring the performance of the cloud resources that you're using? So in summary, we talked about building an environment inventory, why you would want to do that, and how it's going to help you and help the company, maybe even save some money if you are reaching a tipping point on licensing, but maybe no one was aware of that. We talked about backups in terms of how to take them from a very high level and how to check that you're actually taking them. And we talked about the need to be able to restore those backups. You're testing yourself and you're testing the backups. We talked about SQL Agent job notifications, where I introduced this concept I'm calling job equity. It's just, do you have the relationship with people that you can ask questions? Who's responsible for this data? And you work up the chain and find those persons. You build a relationship. You become their hero because you're fixing things that were broken that other people weren't even aware weren't working. And then you can use that job equity, that credibility, to talk about security for SQL Server and open up about, does Johnny really need this access? Or, hey, not even so much does Johnny need this access, and I'm just picking on a random name, so I apologize if your name is Johnny, but we have 50 people or 50 people who are sysadmins. Do we really need that many sysadmins? Because that's 50 opportunities for someone on the outside to compromise credentials and hurt the company. Could we narrow that down? Really, thank you all for attending. I definitely appreciate this invite, this opportunity to talk to you about a plan to exercise or to execute when you step into a new DBA role. I'm hoping that there'll be some questions at the end, and I'll put my information here on this last slide of ways that you can contact me.
All right, thank you. So Anders mentions great presentation. It's always good to get this type of refresher. We do have a question from a little earlier. DBDev22 asks, do you have a version which will populate the inventory from Azure as well? So you had an example of populating an on-premises SQL Server, I believe.
I do not. I suspect that you can use T-SQL to get that information. I have seen that for AWS, so I'm sure that Azure does have that. I can work on that. That's a good question. I should include that next time.
Excellent. And if there are any other questions for anybody in chat, now is the perfect opportunity to get them in. Even if you have a question that you're starting to type out and you don't want us to leave before you're finished with it, just put a little thing in chat. Hey, I have a question. And then that automatically buys you some time to ask the question. Otherwise, I have to sit here and vamp and hope that somebody will ask a question. And then if nobody asks a question, then it's all for nothing and we're all doomed. So please don't let us go down this nihilistic corner. Ask questions. I believe that chat is forcing us into an existential crisis. So, all right, what I'll do is do a little slow roll of the exit. That way, if there is a question before we get done, there's still an opportunity to type it all out. Thank you again. Great presentation. Definitely appreciate the steps and a couple things to keep in mind. And frankly, even if you're not new to the position, but just haven't looked at some of the stuff before, it's good to keep that in track and keep it systematized.
Sure.
So with that, assuming that there are no other questions, assuming that chat is just leading me on and trying to get me to ramble, we're going to wrap things up for this evening. Appreciate it. Appreciate everybody in chat for coming down, listening. Remember that next week we actually have a little bit of a change of talk. Had a little speaker switcheroo, and Andy Leonard is going to be talking to us about getting started with Azure Data Factory's REST API. So that will be for our business intelligence and data science subgroup. If you're interested in that, all of our meetings are available at meetup.com/trypass. And because it looks like there are no more questions, I'm going to call it an evening. So thank you, Lee. Thank you, chat. Thank you, everybody. And until we see each other again, everyone, take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.